If you have the IPCC saying that you need to have nuclear in the mix, and unfortunately this environment minister won't even pick up the phone to talk to any person in that sector, I think we have a problem. I'm honored to sponsor this petition that I believe the doctor is going to go over.
This petition, which argues for the inclusion of nuclear within the Green Bond framework, has been very popular amongst Canadians. It is in the top 3% of all 465 petitions that have been launched in this 44th parliamentary session, and number 1 in economy and finance. This issue seems to have touched a nerve amongst Canadians, and I think there's a good reason for that. It's out of step with the science, and it actually lumps nuclear technology in alongside the so-called sin stocks: gambling, tobacco, firearms, alcohol. Well, it's not controversial amongst the scientists. There is a scientific consensus. In the IPCC, all 4 of the illustrative decarbonization pathways call for an increase in nuclear energy. We have the evidence right here at home with this Made in Canada climate solution. We achieved what's been called the greatest greenhouse gas reduction in North America with the nuclear-powered Ontario coal phase-out. This had dramatic improvements not only for the climate, but as a physician, something I care deeply about, for air pollution and for health. We had 53 smog days before the coal phase-out occurred, and we got that down to 0. Again, it was nuclear energy which replaced coal in Ontario. Canadian uranium, which is used in our domestic nuclear fleet and around the world, displaces the equivalent of 1/3 of Canada's national emissions on an annual basis. Our CANDU reactor actually produces medical isotopes, and these isotopes enable modern healthcare. They sterilize 40% of the world's single-use medical instruments, enabling a sterile environment in healthcare. We produce enough cobalt-60 to sterilize 20 billion pieces of PPE, which have been vital during this pandemic. The EU has found itself in a very difficult position, partially because of nuclear phase-out policies in places like Germany. They have hooked themselves up to Russian natural gas and are financing Putin's war of aggression in Ukraine to the tune of hundreds of millions of euros every day. Canada has a unique opportunity to export not only our uranium but also our nuclear technology and take over this key market in Europe. Nuclear is really domestically the ultimate economic stimulus. We have a 96% made in Canada supply chain with our CANDU nuclear technology. Every dollar that we invest in CANDU returns $1.40 in GDP. And we saw in Ontario a truly just transition for fossil fuel workers working in coal plants who were able to get similarly high quality jobs in the trades and in STEM, but with even better occupational health, leaving a dusty coal environment for a clean nuclear plant. We have very few options for our climate goals and for decarbonization. Hydroelectricity is really tapped out. We know that we need to double our electric grid in order to achieve our net zero goals, the equivalent of 113 Site C dams or 96 large CANDU reactors. Bonds built that key energy infrastructure of our country. Bonds built our hospitals, our roads, our bridges, and our power plants. And bonds will build the basis of our carbon-free future, that infrastructure that is so vital. And that is why it is truly such an affront that Green Bond Framework excludes nuclear energy alongside the so-called sin stocks. And that is why over 10,000 Canadians have signed on to this petition. Thank you very much.
We were hearing that some advisors were sort of essentially told the government the framework will not be supporting programs that have unambiguous environmental benefits. So I just wanted to get your reaction on that.
The government's line on this is actually in stark contradiction to modern green finance. EU, 27 member states just spent 2 years forming their sustainable finance taxonomy. And they, after careful consideration, obviously this is a politicized issue, but after careful scientific study by the Joint Research Committee, they decided to include nuclear in that taxonomy. And that's really the world's largest effort so far at examining this issue. You know, Canada needs to lead on this, not be the kind of tail wagging behind. There is a real contradictory position here because the Liberal government is distributing some innovation funds to advanced and small modular reactors, which is great. But you can't do that and at the same time essentially say nuclear is a sin. especially with its contributions to climate change, clean air, and as I was mentioning, something that affects me personally in my workplace in the hospital, medical isotopes, which are incredibly undervalued, but a really important contribution from our CANDU technology. I think it's important that I kind of explain who I am here. I'm an emergency physician. I'm a volunteer. I do this out of a sense of civic duty, and my organization is entirely volunteer. We have no paid staff. I'm very glad that Minister Champagne has been providing some funding for advanced reactor concepts, but you can't have this contradictory policy. It just doesn't make sense, and it sends the wrong signals. And there is a huge interest in green finance. I mentioned the EU Sustainable Finance Taxonomy. Bruce Power, that's the world's largest operating nuclear plant, which provides an enormous amount of carbon-free energy for Ontario, they put out a green bond just last year, and it was oversubscribed by 6 times. It was a $500 million bond. They got over $3 billion of interest in it. International finance, patient capital, pension funds, again, the infrastructure builders are ready to enter into the sector, and it is the ultimate economic stimulus. Every dollar spent returns $1.40 to the Canadian economy. We don't have infinite resources. We've been spending a lot, and we've had to because of COVID, et cetera. But we need to follow the evidence, follow what works, and we have evidence of what works with the Ontario coal phase out.